Yes, I know how late this video is. This is my monthly video where I talk about the top books that I read in the previous month. I'm also hoping to talk about some books that I'm planning to read in the near future. Obviously, I would have planned to make this video earlier, but I was traveling earlier this month, and then when I got back there was some stuff I was dealing with, and that basically just derailed my entire video making schedule. I'm hoping this video will help me get back on track, so let's hop to it. By the way, I'm wearing an oversized cardigan because while it is very warm outside, it's very cold in my apartment. Why is it very cold in my apartment? Well, I have a bunny, and bunnies don't tolerate temperatures above the high 70s. So first, I read When You Are Engulfed in Flames by David Sedaris. I'm not sure I really need to say more than that. I mean, it's David Sedaris. His stuff is pretty much always gold. By the way, I actually met David Sedaris back in October when he did a reading, and I drove an hour to see him. Yes, that is his real autograph in my book. Then I read the 6th volume of the Sandman series, which was entitled Fables and Reflections. I love Neil Gaiman's Sandman series. Like, I think the first volume was life-changing for me. It's about this family of immortal beings, which include death, destiny, desire, and our main protagonist, Dream, who is also called the Sandman. This particular volume was a set of shorter narratives, but all connected to the Sandman and how he affects people's lives. This wasn't my favorite volume in the series, but still a pretty solid read. After that, I read Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, the same Bechdel of the famous Bechdel test for movies. This is a biographical reflection on Bechdel's father, who was a closeted gay man who eventually committed suicide. And his narrative accompanies Bechdel's own journey as a lesbian. The artwork is in kind of a grayscale, but it's still really poignant. It's an incredibly poetic work, and there's some amazing literary references. So David Sedaris always recommends a book when he tours and gives readings. And when I saw him read, he recommended Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. So I thought, sure, I'll read Eileen. It's about this woman called Eileen who leads this pretty sad and uneventful life. She works as an admin in a boys' prison, and she lives at home with her abusive and alcoholic father. And one day a new girl starts working at the prison, and she and Eileen form this really fast friendship. And then they both get involved in a bizarre series of events involving one of the delinquents at the prison. It took a while for the plot action to pick up, but because this is more of a contemplative work, I was okay with that. It's incredibly well written, and I was glad I read it. The next one was super intense. I read the first volume of the Preacher graphic novel series, which I picked up after watching the show. It's about a preacher called Jesse Custer who gets accidentally possessed by a divine being called Genesis. Then Genesis gives him this power to compel people to follow his orders. And upon being possessed, he decides to go out and find God and discover more about his own powers. And he's accompanied by an Irish vampire called Cassidy and his kind of ex-girlfriend Tulip. If you're a very squeamish person, this might not be for you. But if you can put up with a good amount of gore, then I highly recommend this. You'll know this if you've been following my book review videos, but this month I read Touching from a Distance, Ian Curtis and Joy Division by Deborah Curtis. This is of course Ian Curtis's biography, which was written by his widow. Ian Curtis, of course, was this very iconic but enigmatic figure in British music history, and I'm glad this book exists to kind of defog some of the aura around him. It's a great harsh picture of the music industry and of dysfunctional relationships. If you want my full thoughts on this book, I will link my video review below. I've also heard other Joy Division members are also writing their books about this time of their lives. Peter Hook has one, and Bernard Sumner also wrote one. If anyone has read those, hit me up, tell me what you thought. My reading month is never complete without some young adult, and the YA read that stood out to me the most was Meadowtown by Kristen Simmons. People described it as Newsies meets Les Mis, and yeah, it's kind of like a steampunk Les Mis with some Neil Stevenson elements thrown in. Basically, world pollution has forced society to take on this really harsh economic hierarchy where rich people are very rich and they profit off this labor class who are forced into lives of drudgery. The laborers have literally no workers' rights or protections. Even if they're working with really dangerous materials, they have no masks or gloves or anything. That actually doesn't sound that different from some societies today. So there are these two teenagers called Ty and Colin who work in Meadowtown, and they work in an ammunition factory. They encounter Lena, whose family actually runs the ammunition factory, and Lena has actually started to discover a dark side to her family's business. I wish more young adult novels talked about economics and class warfare and administrative corruption like this one does. I think on Goodreads it has like a 3.58 average rating, and I think that's because this novel doesn't fit cleanly into the landscape of current YA novels, and it's just severely underrated, so I highly recommend this book. Finally, I read The Dinner by Herman Koch, based on the recommendation translation of Sana from Books and Quills. It's a really famous Dutch novel. It's about two couples whose sons have been involved in a really heinous crime, and they sit down to dinner to talk about what to do about it. It starts out seeming kind of light, but gets dark really fast, almost before you realize it's happening. It's told in a non-linear format, so I could kind of understand how some people found the storytelling frustrating and draggy, but ultimately I really enjoyed it. It's a great exploration of familial relationships and privilege. Now on to my summer TBR. This is not a comprehensive list of the books I'm planning to read this summer. I feel like it'd be super overwhelming for one video, so these are just all the high points that I want to hit in the next couple months. First, I have Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. This is kind of a battered copy that I got a few years ago when I graduated from college. My college was having a yard sale and some people were selling their used books. I actually started reading it yesterday. The book centers on a conversation between a really aging Kublai Khan and Marco Polo, and Marco Polo is regaling Kublai Khan with stories about all the cities he's been to, and apparently it becomes obvious that as he describes more cities, he's really talking about the same city but in different ways. I love Italo Calvino's book If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, but then I heard this was another really famous novel of his, so I decided I should read it. Then I have Zadie Smith's Changing My Mind Occasional Essays. I don't think I've ever read anything of Zadie Smith's and disliked it. I've read the majority of her novels. I've also read some of her work that she's put in the New Yorker, and because of that, I'm assuming I will like her nonfiction work as well. Then I have Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. Of course, everyone's reading The Handmaid's Tale, but I've read The Handmaid's Tale. This book is part of the Mad Adam trilogy, which is set in a dystopia. Mankind has been wiped out because of a plague. So the story centers on a guy called Snowman who thinks he may be the last human, and he's lost his two friends Oryx and Crake, and he wants to find out more about what happened to the world. So he goes on a journey and he's kind of traipsing through basically the ruin of the world. And then I have Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. It's about this childless couple living in 1920s Alaska, and they find this child in the wilderness and they decide to raise her as their own, but later on it becomes clear that there's more to her than meets the eye. It's kind of got a fairy tale vibe to it. I thought I should read it. Of course, we have the two books that I unboxed in the last video. We got Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia and Flame in the Mist by Renee Audier. Eliza and Her Monsters is about mental health and internet life and internet creativity. Flame in the Mist is kind of a revenge fantasy story set in Japan. So that was my May wrap-up and my summer TBR. As always, you can follow me on Goodreads. I'll link my profile below. If you've read any of the books I mentioned, please hit me up with your thoughts. I'm headed to VidCon this week, so at some point expect a vlog. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and I will see you later.